For 5 days, a strange dog cried at the feet of the Virgin Mary statue, and when the priest finally followed him, the whole neighborhood discovered a secret no one was prepared for. It began on a cold Monday morning outside St. Anne Catholic Church, a small parish tucked into a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, where the same people passed the same sidewalks, waved to the same neighbors, and believed they knew every story hidden behind every front door. But that morning, something was different. At the edge of the church courtyard, beneath the pale stone statue of the Virgin Mary, a dog was sitting alone. He was medium-sized, with dark brown fur damp from the early mist. No collar, no tag, no leash dragging behind him. Just a trembling body pressed close to the concrete base of the statue, his eyes lifted toward Mary's peaceful face, and a sound coming from his throat that made people slow down without knowing why. It was not barking. It was not growling. It was crying. A low, broken whimper rose from deep inside the animal, soft enough to be missed by anyone in a hurry, but painful enough that Mrs. Helen Carter, who walked past the church every morning on her way to open the bakery, stopped in the middle of the sidewalk with one hand over her chest. "Poor thing," she whispered. Across the street, Father Thomas Miller stepped out of the rectory carrying the church keys, his black cassock moving slightly in the wind. At 64, he had unlocked those doors almost every morning for 27 years. He knew the rhythm of the parish better than he knew his own breathing. Coffee before sunrise, keys in hand, bell at 7, mass at 7:30. So when he saw the dog, he paused only briefly. Probably lost, he thought. Someone's pet got out overnight. He looked toward the nearby houses, expecting a worried owner to come running with a leash and an apology. But no one came. The dog did not turn when cars passed. He did not move when the church bell rang. He did not sniff the ground like a stray searching for food. He simply stared up at the Virgin Mary, as if waiting for her to answer something only he understood. By noon, 2 schoolchildren had seen him. By evening, half the parish had heard about the crying dog at Mary's statue. Someone left a bowl of water. Someone else brought dry food in a paper plate. The dog drank a little. He barely ate. And when night settled over the church, when the streetlights flickered on and the last car left the parking lot, he was still there beneath the Virgin Mary's open hands, crying into the darkness. Most people thought he would be gone by morning, but morning came, and the dog was still there. By Tuesday morning, the crying dog had become something people noticed before they noticed the weather. At St. Anne Catholic Church, the day usually began with quiet order. The church sat on the corner of Maple and Harrison, a modest brick building with a white steeple, an old bronze bell, and stained glass windows that caught the sunrise in soft pieces of red, blue, and gold. It was not a famous church. No tour buses stopped there. No newspaper wrote about it. It was the kind of parish where people knew which pew belonged to which family, where funerals felt personal, baptisms felt communal, and Sunday coffee in the parish hall could last longer than the homily. For nearly 3 decades, Father Thomas Miller had been the steady heartbeat of that place. He was 64 years old, tall but slightly stooped now, with silver hair trimmed close and eyes that looked gentle even when his voice sounded tired. He had arrived at St. Anne as a younger priest with quick steps, strong hands, and a deep belief that a parish could become a family if someone loved it long enough. Back then, he remembered every child's name, every widow's birthday, every couple struggling quietly in the back pew. But years had a way of wearing down even good men. By the time the dog appeared beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary, Father Thomas had become a man ruled by routine. He woke at 5:30 each morning before the alarm rang. He brewed black coffee in the small rectory kitchen. He read the diocesan emails, checked the parish calendar, reviewed the sick call list, then buttoned his cassock with the same careful movements he had made thousands of times before. At 6:45, he crossed the courtyard with the church keys in his right hand. Every morning, he passed the statue of the Virgin Mary. She stood on a concrete base near the walkway, carved from pale stone, her hands open as if welcoming every burden the neighborhood carried. In spring, children left dandelions at her feet. In December, someone always wrapped a blue scarf around her shoulders. After funerals, grieving families sometimes paused there for a final prayer before driving to the cemetery. Father Thomas had once stopped there often. In his first years at St. Anne, he would pause before Mary's statue, before every difficult hospital visit, and whisper, "Mother, help me say what they need to hear." When a young soldier from the parish died overseas, He stood there in the rain until his cassock was soaked through. When a mother begged him to pray for her son trapped in addiction, he knelt on the concrete and stayed long after the church lights went out. But over time, those pauses became shorter. Then they became nods. Then they became nothing at all. It was not because he had lost faith. Not exactly. He still believed. He still celebrated Mass. He still preached mercy, forgiveness, and hope. He still placed the Eucharist into trembling hands and blessed babies whose parents cried with joy. But somewhere beneath all those responsibilities, his heart had grown tired. There were too many funerals for people he had loved, too many hospital rooms where prayers seemed to float unanswered above machines and tubes, too many families who came for help only after everything had already fallen apart, too many bills, meetings, forms, repairs, complaints, emergencies, and quiet disappointments stacked one over another until ministry began to feel less like fire and more like duty. So Father Thomas kept moving. That was how he survived. Keep the schedule, open the church, say the Mass, visit the sick, answer the phone, balance the accounts, smile when people needed reassurance, pray even when the words felt dry. On that Tuesday, he noticed the dog again while walking from the rectory to the sacristy. The animal was in the same place, tucked close to the statue's base, head low, eyes wet, body shivering in the morning air. Mrs. Helen Carter was there too, bending slowly to replace the water bowl she had left the day before. Helen was 71, widowed, practical, and stubborn in the way church ladies often are when compassion becomes a habit. She had run the bakery 2 blocks over for almost 40 years, and she knew Father Thomas well enough to read the concern beneath his silence. "He was here all night, Father," she said. Father Thomas looked at the dog, then at the bowl, then toward the row of houses across the street. "Someone will come looking for him," he answered. "Sid." Helen did not argue. She only watched the dog's eyes stay fixed on the Virgin Mary. "Maybe," she said softly. "But he sure seems to be looking for someone too." Father Thomas heard the sentence, but he did not let it enter too deeply. He had a morning Mass to prepare. The parish secretary would be in by 9. A leak in the parish hall roof needed attention. The diocese had requested updated financial reports. 2 families had asked about baptism dates. One elderly man at Mercy General wanted confession before surgery. Life at St. Anne did not stop because a dog had chosen the courtyard as a place to cry. Inside the church, the familiar scent of wax and old wood met him like memory. He moved through the sanctuary with practiced hands, setting the chalice, checking the lectionary, adjusting the microphone. A few parishioners entered quietly, genuflecting before sliding into their usual pews. From outside, faint but unmistakable, the dog whimpered again. A young altar server named Caleb glanced toward the doors. "Father," the boy whispered, "do dogs pray?" Father Thomas looked at him, surprised by the question. For a moment, the priest almost smiled. Then he looked toward the entrance, where the sound of the crying dog seemed to pass through the heavy wooden doors and settle somewhere near the altar. "I don't know, Caleb," he said quietly, "but maybe they know when someone needs prayer." Mass began a few minutes later. Father Thomas spoke the opening words with the same steady voice the parish had trusted for 27 years. Yet while the congregation responded, while candles flickered and morning light colored the stained glass, part of him remained outside in the courtyard, with a dog no one knew, crying beneath the open hands of the Virgin Mary. On that first morning, Father Thomas Miller did what most people do when they see something strange but not yet urgent. He explained it away. The dog sat close to the concrete base of the Virgin Mary statue, his body curled as if he had been there for hours. His dark brown fur was clean enough to suggest he belonged to someone, not thin or matted like a dog that had lived on the street. There was no blood, no limp, no obvious injury. Just those wet eyes lifted toward Mary's face, and that low, aching cry that rose and fell like a prayer no one had taught him how to say. Father Thomas stopped halfway across the courtyard. For a few seconds, the church keys rested still in his palm. The morning air was cold. A thin layer of frost clung to the edge of the grass. Across the street, a school bus groaned to a stop, its yellow lights flashing against the brick homes. A man in a work jacket scraped ice off his windshield. Somewhere down Maple Street, a garage door rattled open. Everything around the church moved with ordinary American morning rhythm, except the dog. He did not chase the bus. He did not bark at the man across the street. He did not sniff around the bushes or search the parking lot for scraps. He only stared at the Virgin Mary, as if every answer he needed was hidden in that quiet stone face. Father Thomas took one step closer. "Hey there, buddy," he said. The dog's ears moved slightly, but he did not turn away from the statue. That bothered the priest more than he wanted to admit. Usually dogs reacted. They looked up. They wagged. They backed away. They barked. This one seemed aware of him but not interested in him. Not yet. Father Thomas glanced toward the houses lining the block. Someone probably left a gate open, he thought. Maybe a kid forgot to latch the backyard fence before school. That explanation was simple, reasonable, comfortable, and Father Thomas had grown very skilled at choosing the comfortable explanation first. He unlocked the church doors and stepped inside. The heavy wood door closed behind him with a familiar echo. Inside, St. Anne was dim and peaceful. The red sanctuary lamp glowed near the tabernacle. Rows of polished pews stretched toward the altar. The air smelled faintly of candle wax, old hymnals, and lemon oil from the cleaning crew's work the night before. This was the world Father Thomas understood. Schedules, sacraments, scripture readings, candles, bells. Parish bulletins stacked neatly on the back table. Outside, the dog kept crying. At 7:30, morning mass began with only 12 people scattered through the pews. Mrs. Donnelly sat in the second row, her rosary wrapped around her hand. Mr. Rivera, who came before every shift at the warehouse, knelt near the aisle. A young mother bounced a restless toddler against her shoulder. Father Thomas stood at the altar and spoke the prayers with practiced calm. But twice during the readings, the faint whimper slipped through the church doors. A few heads turned. Mrs. Donnelly made the sign of the cross, though she did not know why. Mr. Rivera looked toward the back of the church, frowning. The young mother pulled her toddler closer, as if the sound carried sadness strong enough for even a child to feel. Father Thomas heard it too. He continued the Mass. Afterward, as people slowly moved toward the exit, the little crowd gathered near the front steps. The dog was still there. "He doesn't look dangerous," Mr. Rivera said. "No," Mrs. Donnelly answered. "He looks heartbroken." Father Thomas came out last, holding the folder with parish notices under one arm. He saw the small circle forming and felt the first stir of inconvenience. Not anger, not cruelty, just the quiet pressure of a day already full. There were emails waiting, a roof repair estimate to review, a funeral family coming at 10, a call to return from the diocese, a hospital visit across town. A crying dog was not on the calendar. Mrs. Helen Carter arrived from the bakery carrying a paper bowl and a bottle of water. Her gray hair was tucked beneath a knit cap, and flour dust still clung to one sleeve. "Move aside a little," she told the others. She poured water into the bowl and set it near the dog. The dog lowered his head, drank 3 small laps, then stopped. Helen opened a napkin with pieces of sausage biscuit inside and placed it near him. He sniffed it once. Then he looked back at the Virgin Mary. Helen's expression changed. "Well," she whispered, "that's not normal." Father Thomas tried to sound reassuring. "He may just be scared." "Dogs act strange when they're lost." Helen looked up at him. "Maybe, but lost dogs usually want to be found." The sentence hung between them. Father Thomas did not answer. Instead, he looked at the dog one more time and told himself what he needed to believe. The owner would come by lunchtime. Someone would post on the neighborhood Facebook group. A child would run up, calling his name. A truck would pull over, and a relieved family would take him home. The story would end before it became his responsibility. By late afternoon, the dog was still there. By sunset, a few more people had stopped to look. Someone had taken a picture from the sidewalk. Someone else had called him Mary's dog under their breath. Father Thomas locked the church after the final appointment of the day. The sky had turned purple over the steeple. Streetlights blinked on one by one. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood pale against the darkening courtyard, her open hands catching the last of the evening light. The dog lay at her feet. Still crying, Father Thomas stood on the church steps longer than he meant to. A thought passed through him, soft but unsettling. What if this was not random? Then he pushed the thought away. He was tired. People saw signs in everything when their hearts were hungry enough. Tomorrow, surely, the dog would be gone. Father Thomas crossed back to the rectory, turned off the porch light, and closed the door. Outside, beneath the Virgin Mary's silent gaze, the dog did not leave. By Thursday morning, the story of the dog had moved beyond the church courtyard. It had slipped into kitchens over breakfast, into school drop-off lines, into the bakery 2 blocks away, into quiet phone calls between parishioners who normally only talked about weather, grandkids, and Sunday Mass times. Is he still there? That was the first question people asked now. Not how are you? Not did you hear about the road work? Not even, will it rain today? Just that. Is the dog still there? And the answer was always the same. Yes, he was still there. The sky over St. Anne Catholic Church had turned the color of wet steel. A slow, cold drizzle fell across the neighborhood, darkening the brick walls of the church and gathering in shallow puddles along the sidewalk. Cars hissed over the wet street. The steeple bell rang at 7, its sound heavy in the damp air. Beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary, the dog lay curled close to the concrete base, his fur speckled with rain. Someone had placed an old blue towel beside him. Someone else had left a plastic container of food under the statue's ledge, trying to keep it dry. Mrs. Helen Carter had returned with warm broth in a paper cup, but the dog only lifted his head long enough to drink a few mouthfuls before lowering it again. His eyes stayed fixed on Mary. That was what unsettled people most. Not just the crying, the watching. He watched the Virgin Mary with the stillness of someone waiting outside a hospital room, someone who had nowhere else to go, someone holding on because leaving would mean giving up. By mid-morning, 3 children from St. Anne's small Catholic school stood near the fence in matching navy sweaters, whispering to each other as their teacher tried to guide them toward the parish hall. "Why won't he go home?" one girl asked. "Maybe he doesn't have a home," said another. A boy named Caleb, the same altar server who had asked Father Thomas if dogs prayed, stared longer than the others. "No," he said quietly. "He looks like he knows exactly where he is." The teacher placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Caleb." But Caleb kept looking back, troubled in a way children often are when they sense something adults are trying to explain away. Inside the church, morning mass began under a strange weight. Only 18 people were present, but the space felt fuller, as if the dog's cry had followed everyone inside and taken a seat among them. Father Thomas processed to the altar with measured steps. The candles burned steadily. Rain tapped against the stained glass windows. The smell of wet coats mixed with incense and old wood. When Father Thomas opened the lectionary, the church fell silent. Then, faintly, from outside came the sound. A low whimper. Long, trembling. The priest paused for half a breath, barely enough for most people to notice. But Mrs. Donnelly noticed. Mr. Rivera noticed. Helen Carter noticed from the back pew, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Father Thomas continued reading. His voice stayed calm, but the words seemed to land differently that morning. Every sentence about mercy, every phrase about the lost and the weary, seemed to circle back toward the courtyard, toward a soaked dog beneath Mary's open hands. During the homily, Father Thomas spoke about compassion. He had planned the message days earlier, before any of this began. It was supposed to be simple. Love your neighbor, carry one another's burdens, do not grow numb to suffering. But as he preached, his own words began to trouble him. Do not grow numb to suffering. He saw Helen's eyes lift toward him. He saw Caleb sitting with his class, still glancing toward the doors. He saw Mr. Rivera bow his head. And outside, the dog cried again. Father Thomas lost his place for a moment. He looked down at his notes, then closed the folder. For several seconds, he said nothing. The congregation waited. Finally, he continued, but softer now, without the polished tone of a man delivering prepared remarks. Sometimes, he said, God allows a small sound to disturb us because we have ignored louder ones for too long. No one moved. Even Father Thomas seemed surprised by the sentence. After Mass, the unease spread. In the vestibule, people gathered in small groups, speaking in lowered voices. He hasn't left for 3 days. That animal belongs to somebody. What if his owner died? What if he's waiting for someone? What if this means something? Father Thomas stood near the sacristy door, hearing fragments of every conversation. He wanted to caution them, to stop the parish from turning a lost dog into a miracle before anyone knew the facts. He had seen people attach heaven's name to ordinary coincidences before. He knew how quickly emotion could outrun truth, but this no longer felt ordinary. He stepped outside after the church emptied. The rain had softened to a mist. The dog was still at the statue, head low, chest moving slowly. Father Thomas approached closer than he had on the first day. "Why are you here?" he asked under his breath. The dog's ears twitched. For the first time, he turned his head and looked directly at the priest. There was no aggression in his eyes, no fear, only exhaustion, loyalty, and something that almost looked like pleading. Father Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. A priest spent his life listening to human sorrow. Confessions whispered through screens, mothers crying beside caskets, men ashamed of their failures, children afraid of losing someone they loved. But this was different. This sorrow had no words. And maybe that was why it pierced deeper. Helen came up beside him, holding an umbrella over both of them without asking. "Father," she said quietly, "I called the shelter. No one has reported a missing dog that matches him." Father Thomas kept his eyes on the animal. "Maybe they haven't called yet. Maybe." Helen's voice was gentle, but she did not sound convinced. Across the street, a woman slowed her car to stare. A man walking his golden retriever stopped at the corner and crossed himself. The neighborhood had begun to feel it now, not panic, not fear, but a quiet pressure, as if something unseen had settled over St. Anne and was waiting for someone to pay attention. That night, long after the church lights were off and the rectory had gone dark, Father Thomas stood at his upstairs window. The rain had stopped. The courtyard glistened beneath the street lamp. The statue of the Virgin Mary looked almost luminous in the damp air. At her feet, the dog remained, still watching, still crying. And for the first time, Father Thomas did not pray for the dog to leave. He prayed to understand why it had stayed. By Friday morning, concern had turned into action. The dog had now spent 4 days at the feet of the Virgin Mary statue, and even the most patient people in the parish had begun to admit that waiting was no longer enough. The drizzle had passed, but the cold remained. A thin wind moved through the church courtyard, shaking the bare branches along Maple Street and lifting fallen leaves against the concrete walkway. The dog was weaker now. He still sat close to the statue, but his body no longer held the same tense watchfulness. His head dipped lower. His eyes looked tired. The paper plate of food someone had left the night before remained almost untouched. The water bowl was half full. Mrs. Helen Carter stood near the walkway, with her coat pulled tight around her chest, watching him with the anxious face of a woman who had already made up her mind. "This can't keep going," she told Father Thomas. The priest stood beside her, silent. He knew she was right. Compassion was one thing. Letting an animal waste away in the cold was another. If the dog had an owner, the shelter could scan him for a microchip. If he was sick, they could get him help. If he had been abandoned, at least he would be somewhere warm. So, Helen called animal control. By noon, a white county vehicle turned onto Maple Street and pulled up in front of St. Anne Catholic Church. The words "County Animal Services" were printed along the side in blue letters. A few parishioners who had been lingering near the courtyard stepped back. Across the street, a man paused with a grocery bag in one hand. 2 kids on bikes slowed down at the corner. Everyone watched. The officer who stepped out was a broad-shouldered woman in a navy jacket named Officer Diane Brooks. She moved with the calm confidence of someone who had handled frightened animals, angry homeowners, and emotional children more times than she could count. She nodded to Father Thomas, then glanced toward the statue. But the dog was not there. For a moment, no one said anything. Helen looked toward the base of the Virgin Mary statue, then around the grass, then behind the shrubs. "He was right there," she said, almost apologetically. "He was right there 5 minutes ago." Officer Brooks walked slowly around the statue. She checked behind the hedges, the side of the church, the narrow passage leading toward the parish hall. Father Thomas followed at a distance, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment he did not want to name. Maybe this was the end of it. Maybe the dog had finally gone home. Officer Brooks circled the parking lot, scanning beneath parked cars. She whistled once, then made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. Nothing. No bark. No whimper. No flash of brown fur. "He may have gotten spooked when he saw the truck," she said. "Happens all the time. Strays learn fast." Father Thomas nodded, though the word stray still felt wrong. The dog had never acted like a stray. He had acted like a messenger who refused to leave his post. Officer Brooks waited nearly 20 minutes. She drove slowly around the block, checking alleys and front yards. By the time she returned, the small crowd had begun to break apart. "Call again if he comes back," she told Father Thomas. "If he's been out here this long and not eating, we need to get him looked at." "We will," the priest said. The vehicle pulled away, its tires crunching softly over loose gravel at the edge of the street. The courtyard felt suddenly empty. For the first time in 4 days, the statue of the Virgin Mary stood alone. Helen crossed herself. "I should feel better," she murmured. Father Thomas looked at the empty concrete base. So should I? But he did not. The rest of the afternoon passed with a strange quiet over St. Anne. People still came and went. A young couple met with Father Thomas about their upcoming wedding. The parish secretary answered phone calls. Someone from the roofing company stopped by with an estimate. Life continued in its usual practical American way, full of appointments, bills, keys, signatures, and polite conversations. Yet every time Father Thomas passed a window, his eyes moved toward the statue. Empty. At 3 o'clock, still empty. At 5, empty. By early evening, Father Thomas told himself the dog must have found his way home. Perhaps there was a family somewhere holding him now, relieved, scolding him gently, drying his coat with an old towel. Perhaps a little boy or girl was crying with happiness. Perhaps all of this had only been an unusual, sad incident that had finally resolved itself. That explanation should have brought peace. Instead, it felt unfinished. After dinner, Father Thomas sat alone in the rectory kitchen with a bowl of soup growing cold in front of him. The small room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. He tried to read through the Sunday bulletin, but the words blurred into columns and dates. At 9:17 p.m., he stood to lock the rectory door. It was a habit. Check the front lock. Turn off the porch light. Look once toward the church. He opened the door. The cold hit his face first. Then the sound reached him. A low, broken cry. Father Thomas froze. Across the courtyard, beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary, the dog was back. He lay in the exact place he had been before, pressed against the concrete base, as if he had never left. His body trembled. His head rested on his paws. His eyes were lifted toward Mary again. Father Thomas stepped out onto the porch, one hand still on the doorframe. For several seconds, he did not move. The street was quiet. No cars passed. No people stood nearby. The animal control truck was long gone. The neighborhood had settled into evening darkness. And somehow, after vanishing at the exact moment people came to take him away, the dog had returned to the Virgin Mary. Not to the bakery, not to the school, not to a random porch or alley, to the statue, to the same place. Father Thomas felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. Inside the rectory, the clock kept ticking. In the courtyard, the dog kept crying. This time, the priest did not tell himself the owner would come. This time, he did not tell himself it was nothing. He only stood there in the cold, staring at the dog beneath Mary's open hands, and whispered the first honest words that came to him. "Lord, what am I supposed to see?" Saturday morning came colder than the others. A pale gray light stretched over Maple Street, touching the rooftops, the parked cars, and the wet grass around St. Anne Catholic Church. The neighborhood was still half asleep. No school buses. No bakery line yet. No children rushing past the fence in navy sweaters. Only the quiet hum of early traffic in the distance and the soft ringing of wind chimes from a porch across the street. Father Thomas Miller woke before his alarm. He had barely slept. All night the image had stayed with him. The empty courtyard after animal control left. Then the dog returned beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary, crying as if nothing in the world mattered except staying there. For the first time in years, Father Thomas did not begin the morning by checking emails or reviewing the parish calendar. He did not sit at the kitchen table with his black coffee and the diocesan notices. He dressed in silence, buttoned his cassock slowly, took the church keys from the hook by the door, and stepped outside before sunrise had fully broken. The dog was still there. He lay at the foot of the Virgin Mary statue, thinner somehow, as if the 5 days had taken more from him than hunger alone could explain. His fur was damp along his back. His eyes were open, tired but alert. When Father Thomas crossed the courtyard, the dog lifted his head. This time the priest did not walk past. He stopped a few feet away. "Still here," Father Thomas said softly. The dog looked at him, then back at the statue. For a moment nothing moved. The church, the rectory, the quiet street, even the bare tree branches seemed to hold still. Then Father Thomas smelled it. Roses. Not the faint sweetness of someone's perfume passing on the sidewalk, not the artificial scent of a candle from inside the church. This was fresh, unmistakable, alive, like a bouquet had just been placed directly in front of him. He turned his head. There were no flowers. The small garden beside the statue had gone dormant weeks ago. The rose bushes near the parish hall were bare, thorny, and black from the cold. No funeral arrangements waited by the church steps. No florist truck sat on the street. No one stood nearby carrying flowers. But the scent grew stronger. It wrapped around the statue for a few seconds, gentle, yet impossible to ignore. Father Thomas stood frozen, one hand clenched around the keys. He had known enough grieving mothers, enough elderly parishioners, enough quiet Catholics with stories they only whispered after Mass to understand what roses meant to many hearts devoted to Mary. Still, he was a cautious man. He did not chase signs. He did not build miracles out of feelings. He had spent decades warning people not to confuse emotion with revelation. But this was not emotion. This was there, clear as the cold air in his lungs. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the scent faded. The courtyard returned to the smell of wet grass, stone, and morning frost. Father Thomas slowly looked at the statue of the Virgin Mary. Her pale face seemed unchanged, peaceful, silent, hands open over the dog below. The dog stood. It was the first time Father Thomas had seen him fully rise. The animal's legs trembled at first, but he held himself steady. He took one step toward the priest, then another. Father Thomas lowered his hand cautiously, expecting the dog to sniff it. Instead, the dog gently caught the edge of his cassock between his teeth. Not hard, not frantic, just a soft tug. Father Thomas looked down. The dog released the fabric, turned away, and walked toward the sidewalk. After 3 steps, he stopped and looked back. The message was wordless, but unmistakable. Come. Father Thomas glanced toward the church doors. Saturday morning Mass would begin in less than an hour. There were candles to light, vestments to prepare, people who would arrive expecting the priest to be exactly where he had always been. There was a breakfast meeting with the Knights of Columbus afterward, a baptism rehearsal at 10:30, a call from the diocese he had postponed twice. His whole life was waiting inside a schedule, but the dog was waiting outside it. For 27 years, Father Thomas had crossed that courtyard to open a church. On that morning, standing under the silent gaze of the Virgin Mary, he felt something deeper than duty press against his heart. A question, not from the dog, not even from himself, from grace. Would he keep walking past what he did not understand? The dog took another few steps, then looked back again. Father Thomas slipped the keys into his coat pocket. "All right," he whispered. "Show me." The dog began walking down Maple Street, slowly at first, then with a steadier pace, as if strength had returned the moment Father Thomas agreed to follow. He did not wander. He did not sniff yards or chase sounds. He moved with purpose, turning once at the corner, then again past the bakery where Mrs. Helen Carter was just unlocking the front door. Helen looked up from the glass entrance, surprised to see the priest following the dog. "Father?" Father Thomas kept walking, eyes on the animal ahead. "I don't know yet," he called back. Helen stepped out onto the sidewalk, watching them move away through the morning light. The dog led Father Thomas past houses he had seen hundreds of times, but never truly noticed. A blue ranch home with a cracked driveway, a duplex with children's bikes lying near the steps, an old maple tree with yellow leaves clinging stubbornly to its branches, mailboxes, porch flags, quiet windows, ordinary homes, ordinary streets, ordinary lives. And yet, as the dog turned onto a narrower block, Father Thomas began to feel the weight of something he had missed. 3 blocks from the church, the dog stopped in front of a small house on the far end of Maple Street. The paint on the porch railing was peeling. The lawn had grown too high. A plastic grocery bag had blown against the fence and stayed there. The curtains were closed, though morning had already arrived. A child's faded chalk drawing still marked part of the walkway, blurred by rain. The dog climbed the 2 porch steps, sat in front of the door, and barked once. Not a cry this time. A clear, firm sound. Father Thomas stood at the bottom of the steps, breathing harder than the short walk required. He knew this house. Or rather, he knew he had passed it. Many times. On the way to the bakery. On the way to visit parishioners. On the way to errands, meetings, and everything he had considered important. But he had never knocked. The dog turned and looked at him. Father Thomas climbed the steps and raised his hand to the door. Before he knocked, he glanced back toward the direction of the church, where the statue of the Virgin Mary stood unseen beyond the houses. The scent of roses was gone, but its meaning remained. Then he knocked. The knock sounded small against the old wooden door. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Father Thomas stood on the porch with the dog sitting beside his shoes, both of them facing a house that seemed to be holding its breath. The curtains were still closed. No television played inside. No footsteps came right away. Only the faint creak of the porch beneath the priest's weight and the distant sound of a pickup truck passing somewhere down Maple Street. The dog did not cry now. That was the first thing Father Thomas noticed. After 5 days of that broken, pleading sound beneath the Virgin Mary statue, the silence felt almost louder. The animal sat upright, ears forward, eyes fixed on the door with a focus so intense it made the priest's chest tighten. Father Thomas knocked again, a little firmer. This time, there was movement inside. Slow footsteps crossed the floor. Something scraped lightly, maybe a chair being pushed back, a lock turned, then another. The door opened only a few inches at first, held by a chain. A woman looked out. She was in her mid-30s, though exhaustion made her seem older. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose, uneven ponytail. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. She wore a faded Ohio State sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. The kind of clothes someone puts on when leaving the house has stopped mattering. One hand gripped the edge of the door as if she needed it to stay upright. Her eyes moved from Father Thomas's collar to his face, then down. The moment she saw the dog, the color drained from her. The chain rattled as she fumbled to open it. "Buddy?" The dog stood. The woman threw the door open. "Buddy?" Her voice broke on the name. She dropped to her knees right there in the doorway, not caring that the porch was cold, not caring that Father Thomas was watching. The dog rushed into her arms, pressing his head against her chest with a desperate tenderness that made the priest look away for a second. The woman buried both hands in his fur. "Oh my God," she sobbed. "Buddy, where were you? Where did you go?" The dog pushed closer, his tail moving weakly for the first time Father Thomas had seen. No whimper came from him, no trembling cry. Only the soft sound of his breathing as he leaned into the woman like a child finally home. Father Thomas stood still, unable to speak. Everything he had assumed over the past 5 days began to collapse. This was not a stray. This was not an abandoned animal. This dog had a name, and someone had been looking for him. The woman lifted her tear-streaked face toward the priest. "Father Thomas?" He nodded gently. "I'm sorry to show up like this," he said. "I know this must seem strange." She let out a shaky laugh that turned into another sob. "Strange?" she whispered. "Father, he's been missing for 5 days." The dog's name was Buddy Whitaker. The woman was Sarah Whitaker, though Father Thomas only knew the name vaguely from parish records and old neighborhood mailers. She was not a regular at Mass. Maybe Christmas once, maybe Easter years ago. One of those names a priest might see written down but never truly know. Sarah kept one arm around the dog's neck as if afraid he might vanish again. "He belongs to my daughter," she said. "Lily. She's 14. Father Thomas heard movement deeper inside the house, but no one came to the door. The hallway behind Sarah was dim. A laundry basket sat against the wall, overflowing with towels. An unpaid utility notice lay open on a small table near the entrance. There were dishes in the sink, visible through the narrow line of the kitchen doorway. The house did not look dirty. It looked overwhelmed. Like a place where someone had been fighting too many battles at once. "I found him at the church," Father Thomas said carefully. "Or rather, he found me. He was at the statue of the Virgin Mary." Sarah stared at him. "The church?" "Yes. That's 3 blocks from here." "I know." Sarah looked down at Buddy, confused and shaken. "He's never gone there before," she said. "He barely leaves the yard. He doesn't even like crossing the street." The words settled heavily between them. Buddy had lived in this house. He knew this porch, this door, this woman's voice. If he had known the way back, he could have returned at any time. But he had not. He had gone to the Virgin Mary and stayed. Sarah wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, embarrassed now by her tears but too tired to hide them. "I thought he was gone," she said. "I thought maybe someone picked him up, or he got hit, or—" Her voice failed. "I didn't know what to tell Lily anymore." Father Thomas stepped slightly closer. "Is your daughter home?" Sarah's whole expression changed. Fear moved across her face before she could stop it. "Yes," she said quietly. "She's in her room." Buddy turned his head toward the hallway at the sound of Lily's name. His body went alert again, not anxious now, but ready. As if every mile, every hour, every tear beneath Mary's statue had been for the girl behind that closed bedroom door. Sarah noticed it too. Her hand tightened in his fur. "He's her whole world, Father," she said. "You don't understand. Buddy isn't just a pet." Father Thomas said nothing. He had learned, in that moment, not to rush the explanation. Sarah took a breath, then another, trying to steady herself. But the words came out uneven, like a dam cracking under pressure. "My daughter has been sick for months," she said. "Seizures. Bad ones. The doctors keep changing things, but nothing is working the way it should. Buddy knows before they happen sometimes. He barks for me. He stays with her after. He's the only one who can calm her down." Sad. From somewhere inside the house came a faint sound, a bed creaking, perhaps, or a weak voice trying to call out. Buddy's ears lifted. Sarah closed her eyes as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "When he disappeared," she whispered, "something in Lily just gave up." Father Thomas felt the words strike somewhere deep. 3 blocks. That was all. 3 blocks from St. Anne Catholic Church, a mother had been drowning quietly. A sick child had been fading behind closed curtains. A dog had carried more urgency than anyone else in the neighborhood had seen. And Father Thomas had walked past this street more times than he could count. He looked at Buddy. The dog looked back at him with calm brown eyes, no longer crying, no longer pleading. The message had been delivered. Sarah stepped aside, her voice trembling. "Father," she said, "would you come in?" Father Thomas crossed the threshold of the house he had passed for years but never entered. Behind him, morning light touched the porch. Inside, Buddy moved ahead down the hallway, straight toward the room where Lily was waiting. Buddy reached Lily's bedroom before anyone else. The door was half open, and the room beyond it was dim, the curtains drawn tight even though morning had already filled the rest of Maple Street. A small lamp glowed on the nightstand beside a stack of prescription bottles, folded medical papers, and a plastic cup with a straw. On the wall were photos of a younger Lily in brighter days. Lily at a school picnic, Lily holding a science fair ribbon, Lily laughing in the backyard while Buddy, still a puppy then, jumped beside her with muddy paws. But the girl in the bed looked nothing like the girl in the pictures. Lily Whitaker was 14 years old, thin and pale, with dark hair spread across the pillow and tired eyes that seemed too old for her face. She lay curled on her side beneath a faded quilt, one hand resting near the edge of the mattress, as if she had been waiting for something to touch it. When Buddy stepped into the room, Lily blinked once. Then her lips parted. "Buddy?" The dog crossed the room so quickly his paws slipped on the wood floor. He pressed his head against the side of the bed, whining softly now, not the broken cry from the statue, but a small, trembling sound of relief. Lily pushed herself up with effort, her arms wrapped around his neck. For a moment, no one spoke. Sarah stood in the doorway with both hands over her mouth, crying silently. Father Thomas remained a few steps behind her, aware that he had entered something sacred, something more intimate than any hospital room, any confessional, any altar call. This was not a dramatic miracle with thunder and light. This was a sick child holding the one living creature who had kept her from feeling completely alone. "I thought you left me," Lily whispered into Buddy's fur. Buddy did not move. He only leaned closer, as if his whole body had been made for that one purpose, to stay. Sarah turned away and wiped her face, but the tears kept coming. The past months had hollowed her out in ways no neighbor had seen. She had learned to speak calmly on the phone with doctors, while panic climbed up her throat. She had learned to stretch grocery money, delay bills, count pills, track symptoms, and sleep in fragments. She had learned the sound of Lily's breathing before a seizure, the strange stillness before her body betrayed her, the terrible seconds when a mother could do nothing but wait and pray. Buddy had learned too. He had been the first alarm many nights. Sometimes before Lily's seizures began, Buddy would rise from the rug and stand beside the bed, ears stiff, body tense. Then came the bark, sharp, urgent, unlike any other sound he made. Sarah could hear it from the kitchen, from the laundry room, from the edge of sleep. That bark meant run, and Sarah ran every time. Afterward, when Lily's body finally relaxed and the worst had passed, Buddy would climb onto the bed only when Sarah allowed it. He would lay his head against Lily's chest, feeling her breathing settle beneath him. Sometimes he stayed there for hours, sometimes until dawn. "He knows before I do," Sarah said quietly, as if explaining it to Father Thomas and to herself at the same time. "I don't know how. He just knows." Father Thomas looked at the prescription bottles on the nightstand. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah's shoulders dropped. "Almost 7 months. It started with one seizure at school, then another at home. Then they got closer together." She swallowed hard. The doctors tried medication. Then another dose. Then another one. Every time I thought we were getting somewhere, something changed. Lily kept one hand buried in Buddy's fur, listening without looking up. Sarah lowered her voice. The last doctor said we needed a pediatric neurologist in Cleveland. A specialist, 2 hours away. But the appointment alone? She stopped, ashamed of the numbers. Though none of this was her fault. The tests, the travel, the time off work. Insurance doesn't cover enough. I work mornings at the grocery store and evenings cleaning offices. Mark sends what he can from his job out of state, but we're behind on everything. Father Thomas thought of the unpaid notice near the front door. He thought of the closed curtains. He thought of all the times he had driven or walked past this house and never wondered why the lawn was too high, why the porch light stayed off, why no one from this family had appeared at parish events in years. Where is Lily's father now? He asked gently. Indiana, Sarah answered. Construction. He didn't abandon us, Father. He's trying. But trying from far away still feels like being alone when your daughter is shaking in your arms at 2 a.m. The honesty of it silenced the room. Lily finally looked toward the priest. Her voice was weak, but clear. Did Buddy really go to Mary? Father Thomas stepped closer, careful not to disturb the dog. Yes, he said. He stayed right under her statue. For 5 days? Yes. Lily's eyes filled, but her face softened in a way Sarah had not seen all week. I prayed to her, Lily whispered. When Buddy disappeared, I asked the Virgin Mary to bring him home. Sarah closed her eyes. Father Thomas felt something inside him break open. The timeline aligned with a force he could not explain away. A sick child praying in the dark. A dog leaving home for the first time. 5 days beneath the Virgin Mary. A scent of roses. A tug on a cassock. A priest finally led to a house only 3 blocks from his church. No sermon he had ever preached felt as sharp as that realization. Buddy had not simply come home. He had brought help back with him. Father Thomas looked at Sarah, then at Lily, then at the dog resting his head against the girl's arm. You are not carrying this alone anymore, he said. Sarah tried to answer, but her voice failed. Lily held Buddy tighter. And in that small, dim bedroom on Maple Street, hope entered quietly, not as a cure yet, not as an answer to everything, but as the first light through a curtain that had been closed for far too long. Sunday morning at St. Anne felt different before the first hymn even began. The parking lot filled earlier than usual. People stepped out of their cars in coats and scarves, speaking in low voices, looking toward the statue of the Virgin Mary before walking into church. The concrete base was empty now. No crying dog. No untouched bowl of food. No shivering body curled beneath Mary's open hands. But everyone could still feel him there. Buddy's absence had become its own kind of presence. Inside the church, the pews filled row by row. Mrs. Helen Carter sat near the front, hands folded tightly around her rosary. Caleb, the young altar server, kept glancing toward Father Thomas as if waiting for an answer adults had not yet found. Mr. Rivera stood in the back because there were no seats left by the time he arrived. Father Thomas processed down the aisle slowly. Those who knew him well noticed it. He did not look tired in the usual way. He looked changed. His face carried the weight of someone who had seen a wound too close to ignore and could no longer hide behind routine. Mass unfolded with solemn quiet. The readings were spoken. The prayers rose. The Eucharist was lifted. But beneath every word, the same story seemed to move through the congregation. The dog, the statue, the scent of roses, the house 3 blocks away, the sick girl named Lily. At the end of Mass, Father Thomas remained at the altar instead of stepping away. He adjusted the microphone. The small movement made the church go completely still. There is something the parish needs to know, he began. No one coughed. No one shifted. You all saw the dog that stayed beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary this week. Some of you brought water. Some of you brought food. Some of you prayed quietly when you passed him. I thank you for that. Helen lowered her eyes. Caleb leaned forward. Father Thomas paused, choosing each word carefully. Yesterday, that dog led me to a house on Maple Street, 3 blocks from here. His name is Buddy. He belongs to a 14-year-old girl named Lily Whitaker. A murmur moved through the pews. Lily has been very sick. She has suffered seizures for months. Her mother, Sarah, has been trying to manage doctor visits, medication, bills, work, and fear almost entirely on her own. Her father, Mark, has been working out of state to keep the family afloat. They need a pediatric neurologist in Cleveland, but the cost has been more than they could carry. Father Thomas looked toward the stained glass window where morning light fell across the image of Mary holding the child Jesus. Then he looked back at his people. "I am not telling you this to shame anyone," he said. "I am telling you because I was ashamed yesterday. That house is 3 blocks from this altar. 3 blocks. I have passed it many times. I never knocked." The silence deepened. "And somehow a dog knew before we did." Helen's lips trembled. Father Thomas continued, his voice quieter now, but stronger. "Maybe some will call this coincidence. Maybe some will say Buddy was only lost. I cannot force anyone to believe otherwise. But I know what I smelled in that courtyard. I know where that dog took me. And I know that a child prayed to the Virgin Mary for Buddy to come home. And Buddy brought help back with him." For a long moment, the church held its breath. Then Father Thomas said the words that turned sympathy into action. "Lily's family needs us. Not someday, not in theory, now." After the final blessing, no one hurried to the parking lot. Instead, a line formed outside the sacristy. First came Helen Carter, carrying an envelope in both hands. "For Lily," she said. Then Mr. Rivera stepped forward. "I can drive them to Cleveland if they need it. My truck runs fine." A young nurse named Megan Collins offered to help Sarah organize Lily's medication schedule and medical paperwork. A retired school teacher promised to tutor Lily when she felt strong enough. A mechanic said he could look at the Whitakers' old car. A contractor offered to repair the loose porch steps. 2 mothers from the parish began planning meals before Father Thomas even asked. By noon, the parish hall had turned into something between a command center and a prayer meeting. Names were written on a yellow legal pad. Envelopes were placed in a basket beside a statue of the Virgin Mary. Someone printed a sign-up sheet for meals. Someone else called a clinic in Cleveland. Helen stood near the coffee urn, telling every person who walked in, "Don't just feel bad. Put your name somewhere." And they did. All afternoon, the help kept coming. A man who had not been to Mass in years heard about Lily from his sister and came by with a gas card. A woman from the Baptist church down the road brought a casserole and said, "A sick child belongs to all of us." The owner of the local hardware store sent wood, nails, and paint for the Whitaker porch. A teenager from St. Anne's School emptied his small savings jar into Helen's hands and asked if it was enough. Helen hugged him and said, "It is more than enough." That evening, Father Thomas drove to the Whitaker house with the first envelopes and a list of names. Sarah opened the door with Buddy at her side. For the first time, the curtains behind her were partly open. When Father Thomas explained what had happened, Sarah covered her mouth and stepped back as if the kindness itself was too much to stand under. "They don't even know us," she whispered. "They know now," Father Thomas said. In Lily's room, Buddy climbed onto the rug beside the bed and rested his head near her hand. Lily listened as her mother read the names from the list. Helen, Megan, Rivera, Caleb's family. People she had seen around town but never truly known. Her eyes filled with tears. "Mary heard," Lily said softly. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and held her daughter's hand. Outside, porch lights began turning on along Maple Street, one by one. And for the first time in months, the Whitaker house did not feel like a place sealed off from the world. It felt like the world had finally found its way in. The first trip to Cleveland began before sunrise. Sarah sat behind the wheel of the old sedan, both hands tight around it, while Lily slept in the passenger seat with a blanket over her knees. Buddy lay across the back seat, lifting his head every few minutes, as if checking that the girl was still breathing steadily. In the cup holder were 2 coffees from Helen Carter's bakery. In Sarah's purse was an envelope from the parish, enough to pay for the appointment, the tests, the gas, and one night in a cheap motel if they needed it. For the first time in months, Sarah drove without wondering which bill would have to go unpaid because her daughter needed care. The pediatric neurologist in Cleveland was a quiet man with silver glasses and a calm voice. He did not rush them. He reviewed Lily's records, asked questions no one had asked before, ordered new tests, and explained each step as if Sarah had a right to understand everything happening to her child. 10 days later, the answer came. Lily's medication was not wrong because no one cared. It was wrong because her seizures were not responding to the treatment pattern the previous doctors had assumed. The specialist changed the approach completely, adjusted the dosage slowly, and scheduled monthly follow-ups. The miracle did not arrive like lightning. It arrived like dawn. One night without a seizure. Then 2. then a full week. Sarah still woke at 2 a.m., heart pounding, and hurried down the hall expecting to find Lily in distress. Instead, she found her daughter asleep, one hand hanging over the side of the bed, Buddy lying beneath it with his head pressed against her fingertips. By the fourth week, color had begun to return to Lily's face. By the sixth, she was sitting at the kitchen table eating toast and scrambled eggs while Buddy watched from the floor like a nurse on duty. By the eighth, Sarah heard drawers opening in Lily's room. She rushed down the hallway, afraid something had happened, and stopped in the doorway. Lily was standing in front of the closet. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, barely breathing. Lily looked over her shoulder, thin but smiling. "Looking for my jeans, the dark ones." Sarah covered her mouth. Then she laughed and cried at the same time, the way people do when fear finally loosens its grip and the body does not know how to hold relief. Mark came home 2 weeks after the Parish campaign began. He had heard the story from a neighbor, then from Helen, then from Father Thomas himself. He drove through the night from Indiana and reached Maple Street just after dawn. When he stepped into Lily's room, Buddy barked once, short and firm, as if announcing that the missing piece had finally returned. Mark knelt beside the bed and took his daughter's hand. "I should have been here," he said. Lily squeezed his fingers. "You're here now." Those 3 words began healing something medicine could not touch. In the months that followed, the Whitaker house changed. The curtains opened. The porch steps were repaired. The fence was fixed. Meals appeared on the counter with handwritten notes. Megan, the nurse from St. Anne, helped Sarah keep track of Lily's medicine. Mr. Rivera drove them to Cleveland twice when Sarah was too exhausted to make the trip. Caleb brought Lily a card signed by the entire school, and Father Thomas kept coming back. Not as a priest completing a duty, but as a man learning to see again. Each time he visited, he noticed some small sign of life returning. Lily sitting outside in a hoodie, face turned toward the sun. Lily laughing at Buddy when he stole a pancake from the edge of the plate. Lily doing homework at the kitchen table. Sarah sleeping for 20 minutes on the couch because, for once, someone else was watching the house with her. The day Lily returned to school, the whole morning felt fragile and holy. Sarah packed her backpack twice. Mark warmed the car. Buddy sat by the front door, serious and alert, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Lily came down the stairs slowly, wearing the dark jeans she had searched for weeks earlier and a blue sweater Helen had bought her. She looked nervous, but alive. Before leaving, she knelt beside Buddy. "I'll be back," she whispered. "You wait here, okay?" Buddy touched his nose to her cheek. He waited at the door until she returned that afternoon with a math worksheet in her hand and a tired smile on her face. "I got 3 wrong," she told Sarah. Sarah pulled her into a hug. "Only 3?" Lily smiled. "Only 3?" Months later, on a bright Sunday morning, the Whitaker family walked to St. Anne together. Sarah, Mark, Lily, and Buddy. The air was cool, but the sky was clear. Parishioners stopped as they arrived, some smiling, some wiping their eyes before anyone could see. Father Thomas stood near the church steps, watching them cross the courtyard where the whole story had begun. Lily carried a single white rose. She walked to the statue of the Virgin Mary and placed it gently at Mary's feet. Buddy stepped forward and sat at the concrete base, in the exact place where he had cried for 5 days. But this time, he did not cry. He was calm, peaceful. Still, Father Thomas looked at the dog, then at Lily, standing beside her parents, then at the statue of the Virgin Mary, with her open hands. No one could explain why Buddy had gone there. No one could explain why he had stayed. No one could explain the scent of roses in a courtyard with no flowers. But everyone at St. Anne knew what had happened after they finally listened. A child received help. A mother was no longer alone. A father came home. A parish woke up. And a priest remembered that grace often arrives quietly, waiting for someone to stop walking past it. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Touched by Light for more stories of faith, mercy, and the quiet miracles of the Virgin Mary.